That's who he was. That was the nature of Jesus. And he wants us to be able to do the same and not qualify people. He says, give to everyone who asks. I am haunted by that verse. How many of you are tracking with me? I don't want to give to everyone who asks. I'm happy to give to people who deserve to be given to, but I don't want to give to everyone who asks. You know, when I see that panhandler sitting in front of the liquor store with his hand out, I don't want to give him anything. I'm afraid if I walk by him, he's going to ask me for something, so I make sure I take a wide berth and go across the street. I know. This is way too self-disclosing, isn't it? But nevertheless, you're like this too, so don't look at me so sanctimoniously. Shame on you, Pastor Mark. You are the worst Christian.
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
All right, let's get down to business today. So I have a little message for you today called To Live, to Give. And you know, it's interesting when I'm preparing a message, I often take the words that I'm talking about, and I want to go see how they're used in Scripture. It's always a unique exercise. And so I took the word give, just curious, and I went and researched how many times it was used in the New Testament, either the word give or gave. It's used 292 times in the New Testament. So then I'm thinking, I wonder how many times the word take or took is used, 297. Because it kind of makes sense, right? That it would be even, that if somebody's giving, somebody else is taking. Now, this is probably not a big surprise to you, but guess who's doing most of the taking in Scripture, and guess who's doing most of the giving? Well, God's doing most of the giving, right? I mean, we see hundreds and hundreds of verses that say that. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. My peace I give you. Behold, I give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. He will give you his angels charge over you again and again and again. So God's doing most of the giving. Take a stab at it. Who's doing most of the taking? That would be us, right? You know, Jesus breaks the bread and says, this is my body which was given for you. Take and eat it. When he gave the man the healing, he said, take up your bed and walk. And so we see this paradigm. Obviously, it's true. God's doing the giving. I mean, he is the father of gifts and the giver of gifts, and obviously, and, we're his creation. We're the takers, and so that makes sense. But here's the big question for today. What kind of people do you think he wants you to be in life, givers or takers? You all got that right. He wants us to be givers, and he says, freely you have received, finish it for me, freely give. So he wants us to take on the nature of him as a giver, even though we have been those who have received so much in life. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at a little verse that you all know, but I'm sure there is something in this verse that you have never noticed before, and I'm going to dig that out for you, and I think the light bulb's going to go on for you, but we'll find out. And so verse 30 in Luke chapter 6 says this, give to everyone who asks of you, and to him who takes away your goods, do not ask them back. And just as you want men to do to you, do also to them likewise. But if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Even the sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive back, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much back. But love your enemies, do good, lend, hoping for nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be like the sons of the highest, for he is kind to the unthankful and the evil. So typically, this is what we do. We think that there are two kinds of people. We think there are givers and takers in this world. And we see this. He says he wants you to be a giver. He says, give to all who ask. And then he addresses the takers. And he says, even those who take from you. So we have the givers and the takers. But there's a third type of person that's mentioned here that you probably didn't notice. And see, the givers give, the takers take. And the third type of person, I'm going to call them matchers, because they're people who will give if something is going to be given back to them. Did you notice he said that? He said, this is how I want you to give. I don't want you to just give. I want you to give not expecting anything in return. Now that term matchers is not in Scripture, but the concept is here, and it comes from a psychologist by the name of Adam Grant. He wrote this book called Give and Take, and here it is, and it's a seminal work about how our life works, and that in fact most people are not givers or takers, they're matchers. And they will gladly give if there's something back to them. Quid pro quo, something for something. And you know, if your work, you might give your all at work, as long as someone's paying you for it, right? You might give somebody, you sell something, you might give them a great deal, as long as it's a great deal for you, right? And we have a term for that in our culture. It's called win-win, right? The win-win. That was coined by Herb Cohen back in the 60s. He was the master negotiator, he was called. And he believed that when you negotiate, it should be good for both sides. And I'm not denying that that is true. I think that's probably a very fair way to negotiate. But Jesus, if you're reading this, he pushes us far beyond being a matcher, doesn't he? He says, when you lend, don't expect anything in return. He says, when you give, don't expect it to come back to you. So he is actually pushing us way beyond what we would normally think. And so he is calling us to a higher aspiration. And the higher aspiration is to be people who live to give. Now, I want to take a moment and lay the groundwork for this because you may not be fully aware of what a giver and a taker and a matcher are. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes on that. I want to talk about takers for a moment. And most of you think you know what a taker is, but let me just go with it anyway. And a taker is someone who takes more in life than they give back. And you know people like this. You do. Some of you are this person, and I don't want to offend you with that, but it's sort of true. There are people that go through life and their ethic and their mentality is to always take. Now here's the problem with takers. That takers will burn the bridges of relationship in life because they're always taking from the other person, and those people get sick of you. And what happens is you have to constantly be renewing those relationships because relationships are dispensable for the cost of winning or taking. And you know, I know it's an easy target, but I can't help but think of Donald Trump in this because he's got this huge ego and he has to always win. And so he's busy renegotiating everything so that he either wins or it looks like he wins. And look at what he has done. Look at the personnel and the revolving door in the White House. Look what it has cost him because he always wants to win. And when we have that mentality of always wanting to win, then what we do is we burn the bridges of relationships in our life. It's like the guy who said this, not only is it a good deal for me, but it's a bad deal for you. You know, the perfect negotiation, right? And Jesus addresses those kind of people and says that you can't go through life like that. You need to be someone that knows how to give and not expect anything back. And the takers, they just can't live that way. And they'll often, sometimes anyway, succeed if they don't mind stepping on people. So the first thing is this. The first thing is takers. The second thing is givers. Again, I think we know what a giver is. And givers are people that go through life, and generally they give more than they take. And that is their mentality. And you will find you can actually spot these people. There's a certain demeanor about them. They have this generous and magnanimous spirit that you can tell they're givers, and you can actually spot it from a very young age. A lot of times these people are intuitively givers, and we can all become givers, but some people are almost born that way. And their nature and their tendency is to want to give instead of take. I want to tell you a little story about this because it's really more about my brother than me, but it'll tell the whole story here. So when I was 12 years old and my brother, my next down from me, was 10, my mother sent us off to summer camp. And I don't blame her. Who wouldn't want to get rid of us? And so she sent us off to summer camp, and I was supposed to be looking out for him. But what happened was this. I was 12, he was 10, so he ended up in a different cabin than I did. He was about 3 or 4 cabins down. So I wasn't doing a very good job of taking care of him because I was a taker anyway. And so then about a week into this, our parents sent us a care package. Everybody wants a care package at camp. And what we got from our parents was each of us got a shoebox full of candy. I mean, this made camp worthwhile. A whole shoebox full of candy, that was going to last me the whole time. So I had to decide, what am I going to do with this candy so that it's not stolen by my cabin mates? And I came up with a perfect plan, and that's to put it in my drawer immediately under my underwear. Because no self-respecting boy is going to touch candy that's been under underwear, especially if it's been worn a couple of times. that was my strategy. It worked like a charm. My brother, on the other hand, 2 cabins down, he opens this box, sees all this candy. You know what he did with it? He split it evenly amongst his whole cabin. Everybody got an equal share. I thought, what an idiot. That's what I'm thinking. But anyway, that's what he told me the next day what he did with it. I couldn't believe it. But you know, here's what happened at this particular camp was that every year, out of hundreds of campers, they would pick one person. It was basically a leadership award. And what they would do is they would pick one single camper out of these hundreds of campers, and they would initiate them into a secret organization called the Order of the Falcon. Not joking. And of all the campers, they went right to Underwear Man, right? No, they skipped Underwear Man right over, and they went right to my brother, and they initiated my 10-year-old brother into the Order of the Falcon, which was a secret organization. Almost 50 years later, he still won't tell me what goes on. And what they did was they woke him up at 2 in the morning, they put him into a loincloth, and they danced naked around the fire or whatever. He won't tell me the whole story. And what they were doing was they were recognizing one person that had leadership qualities that were distinguished above everybody else. And my brother, my bratty little 10-year-old brother, got chosen for that role. And I'll tell you something about my brother. He's always been generous like that. And he's always given. And now, all these years later, my brother has been immensely successful in business, made more money than I'll ever make or hope to make. And you know what he has done his whole life? He's always given it away. He gives to everybody. He pays for everything. You can't go. I love hanging out with him because I never have to pay for anything. And you see, that's what happens with givers, is that what God does is God opens up the windows of heaven and pours out a blessing on them, because that's the nature of the gift. It's the gift that keeps on giving, right? So we have, yeah, you can cheer. So we have takers, we have givers, but the last thing I want to talk to you about is about these matchers. Now, matchers are people, as I said, that will give as long as there's something in it for them. And I hate to tell you this, but most people are actually matchers. We have this sense of fairness. And you all know, because you've all had children, right? Or most of you had children. You brought up your children, and you give one of your children something, and immediately you'll hear from the other, "Hey, that's not fair. I didn't get one." To which I would say, "Good, get used to it. Life's not fair, and neither am I." That's how I raise my kids. I hate this concept of fairness. Well, for others. I like it for myself. But life is not fair. And matchers, they always want everything to be fair. I'll do this if you do this. I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. And they go through life with this sense that everything has to work out. Jesus talked about that. He says, when you give, don't expect anything back. Isn't that what he said? That's what he said. Why was he addressing that? Because that's our human nature. That's our problem. That's what we wrestle with. And he said, don't go through life expecting something in return. And he talked about it way more than you've noticed in Scripture. And you'll remember, he talked about the Pharisees and the hypocrites and about their nature of giving and doing good works. He said, don't be like the hypocrites, that when they give alms, they blow the trumpet. Why are they blowing the trumpet? So everybody will see that they gave. So what was the exchange? So they gave money to the poor. They're not getting it back from the poor. What'd they get? They get recognition is what. And he says, if you do that, you have given up your reward. Don't expect a reward in heaven. Well, that's not a very good deal. And so, but, you know, when we think about it, well, a lot of us are like that. We go through life, we're willing to give as long as there's something in it for us. And Jesus says you can't go through life like that. And as I said, most of us aren't givers or takers. We're these matchers. Now, I want to tell you a story about this. It happened just last week. So I needed this part. Doesn't matter what it was. I could not get it in Canada. I could only get it in the U.S. They wouldn't ship it to Canada. So I had it shipped to Pembina, North Dakota. So I had to go pick it up. So last Sunday I decided I'm going to drive to Pembina and I'm going to go pick it up. So I asked Kathy, I said, can you come to Pembina with me? She says, really? That doesn't sound fun. I said, it'll be great. We'll build our relationship and love each other and talk about whatever you want to talk about. Anyway, reluctantly, she agrees. She comes on this journey with me. And so we go down to Pembina. We go through the border. And we go into Pembina, which is like 5 minutes away from the border. Pick up my part, took like 1 minute to pick it up. We're coming back, we get back into Canadian Customs, and the lineup on Sunday afternoon to come back into Canada is a mile long. And of course, you've all been there, most of you have, and you line up and you all go into the left lane and you wait there, and it inches along and inches along. And at a mile long, I thought, this is going to take forever. We're going to be here for an hour. We were trying to come here for 10 minutes. We're now going to be here for an hour or 2 hours. And so then, I want you to think about this. You've got this lineup of people. We love to queue up. We're Canadians, right? But then there's the takers in the crowd, right? You know what the takers started doing? They started pulling out of the line and going to the front and cutting in. And of course, I'm not letting anybody cut up in front of me. You know that, right? I'm like 1 inch behind the car in front of me. I'm practically bumping. There's no way you're squeezing in there, baby. I'm taking up this space because I am a matcher and I believe in justice, and we're going to all wait in this line. And I thought, you know, there's somebody at the front of this line letting these people in. Who are these people? Well, who are they? Those givers, those miserable people that make it so difficult for us matchers. So anyway, they just kept on pulling out of the line and pulling out of the line. And you know, with my sense of righteousness, I'm not pulling out of that line. I am not going to be a taker. But I don't want to be a giver. And so then Kathy starts getting frustrated. She rolls down the window, no joke, sticks her head out the window and starts stopping traffic. And she goes, stop right there, back of the line. We're all waiting here. You can wait in the back of the line like the rest of us. Like if I'm a matcher, Kathy is a super matcher. And she was literally taking these people on. And they're saying, well, there's 2 lines. She says, there's 1 line and you're not in it, back of the line. And, you know, you all laugh, but you know what? That's a little bit who we are and how we're wired. All right, so so now I'm hoping, as I've talked about this, you've identified yourself as either a taker or a giver or a matcher. And what Jesus does is he tries to push us past being the matcher to this extraordinary level of being a giver where we do not expect anything in return. That's what he told us. So I'm going to give you 3 reasons today why you would want to live to give. And here they are up on the screen. Number 1, because giving is a way to love God. Number 2, because giving makes us better people. Number 3 is because no one ever became poor by giving. So the first thing is this, is that we become givers because it's actually one of the few ways that we can show our love to God. And you know, I don't know if you ever noticed this, but what happens is there's not much we can give to God. I mean, he's done everything for us. Everything that pertains to life and godliness, he has given to you. The very breath in your lungs, he has given it to you. What can you give to God? Well, the scripture actually addresses a few things that you can give to God. And one of them is your praise, and the other one is your time, talent, and treasure. And that you can actually do something, you can actually give. And see, Jesus addressed this very carefully. He said, you know, you cannot serve 2 masters. You will either love one and hate the other, or hate one and love the other. And he says, you cannot serve both God and mammon. And so he says, if you're one who holds on too tightly to things, and too tightly to money, and too tightly to your time, if you hold on too tightly to these things, then you're serving those things and you're not serving God. And so what Jesus wants us to do is to become more like him. And that one of the things he actually told us in this verse, that you will be sons of the Most High when you begin to give without expecting in return. It's a hard thing for us to do. And I'll tell you something, you've probably noticed this about Jesus, but do you know he never refused anybody that asked of him? Remember he says, give to everyone that asks. Did Jesus give to everyone that asked? He never refused anybody. He never qualified them. You know, because some of those people might be in those predicaments because of their own affair, right? What do you think the chances of that are? Like 95%. Most people are in a pickle because they got themselves into a pickle. Jesus didn't qualify them and say, well, you deserve to be healed and you don't. No, he healed everybody. Did he not? That's who he was. That was the nature of Jesus. And he wants us to be able to do the same and not qualify people. He says, give to everyone who asks. I am haunted by that verse. How many of you are tracking with me? I don't want to give to everyone who asks. I'm happy to give to people who deserve to be given to, but I don't want to give to everyone who asks. You know, when I see that panhandler sitting in front of the liquor store with his hand out, I don't want to give him anything. I'm afraid if I walk by him, he's going to ask me for something. So I make sure I take a wide berth and go across the street. I know. This is way too self-disclosing, isn't it? But nevertheless, you're like this too, so don't look at me so sanctimoniously. Shame on you, Pastor Mark. You are the worst Christian. And so when we look at this, we can't go through life qualifying people, but don't misunderstand this. He never said you had to give them what they asked for. Right? Remember the man at the beautiful gate? John and Peter are walking, and there he is. He's been there day after day, year after year, begging at the beautiful gate, going into the temple. And John and Peter say, silver and gold have we not, but what we have we give to you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. He gave them what they really needed, not what they wanted. And see, that's the nature of this, is that we can learn how to give and to be magnanimous in that. Now, here's my challenge to see. I grew up in a house where we didn't actually believe in tithing. We didn't go to a church that believed in tithing. We didn't believe in, giving that much. And so I'll tell you a little story about this. So when I was 10 years old, my dad was renovating our house. He added on to the house. And an excavator come in, and they dug this big, huge trench around the house and added onto it. And then we had this huge pile of dirt in the backyard. So I asked my dad, we were playing on the dirt and we liked it, but I asked him what he was going to do with it, if it was going to be there forever. He says, no, we're going to move it back into the hole. And he says, how would you like a summer job of moving that pile back into the hole? I said, how much would you pay me? He says, 25 cents an hour. The last of the big spenders. And I thought, wow, how long would it take, right? And I thought that was pretty good, so I said, sure. So he took me out in the backyard and gave me a shovel and gave me a wheelbarrow, and he said, you dump it into the wheelbarrow and then you dump it in the hole. How hard could it be? I went out every single day all summer for a few hours, and I worked at it all summer. But by the end of the summer, I actually moved that stupid pile of dirt into the hole. And my dad asked me how many hours, and I kept track of every last one of them to the minute, and I'd worked 40 hours. And so my dad gave me $10. Gave me a crisp $10 bill. That was a good deal for my dad, I think. But you know what? I wasn't unhappy with it because it was more money than I ever had in my life at 10 years old. And so I was pretty excited about it. So the next day I'm in church, and the priest is talking about how people aren't giving like they should be in church. And so he says this, he says, what people need to do, what the church needs to do, is if every family just gave $2 a week, we could pay our bills. I thought $2 a week. I did the math. I come from a family of 8, $2 a family per week. That's 25 cents per person. So I put in 25 cents. Oh, I was so proud. I thought that was a whole hour work. And so I put in the 25 cents, and I got home. I couldn't wait to tell my dad because my dad didn't come to church. So I said, so guess what, Dad? I gave him the offering today. He said, how much did you give? I said, 25 cents. He says, why didn't you give the whole $10? I said, what? I worked all summer for that. And I was so mad that he thought I would give the $10, and I was so proud of the 25 cents. And so I was pretty upset that he challenged me on that, because I know my dad probably would have given the $10 because he was a very generous guy. So anyway, into my 20s, I start going to a Bible-believing church, and one of the first things I hear in this Bible-believing church is about this thing called tithing. And they were asking us, I don't know if you've ever heard this before, for 10%. 10%. Now I'm in my 20s, I'm making $1,000 a month. You have any idea how much money that is? Yeah, that's $100. I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding, Pastor. I'm not giving you $100. I thought, what happened to the $2 a week deal? Where did that go? But you see, what I learned, and I don't want you to miss this, is that the book of Deuteronomy tells us that we can give very little back to God. And what happens is that when we give of our time, our talent, and our treasure, we're actually worshiping God. And he says, when you give your tithe, he says, the tithe actually belongs to me. And when you bring the tithe, worship me with it. And so it's actually one of the ways we can love God is by giving. You know, there was this phone call that happened here not so long ago, and this guy phones up, and he says to our receptionist, let me talk to the head hog at the trough. And she says, excuse me? He says, I want to talk to Pastor Mark, the head hog at the trough. And she says, well, Pastor Mark is not here at the moment, and I'll have you know he is not the head hog at the trough. And so this guy says, well, that's too bad, because I was going to give the church a donation of $10,000. To which she said, well, hang on a minute. I think I see the big fat pig coming in right now. So we got the $10,000. So the first thing is this, is that we give because it's one of the ways that we can show our love for God. The second thing is this, that it actually makes us better people. You see, yeah, you can rejoice about that. See, Jesus was a giver. He's trying to push us beyond being matchers in life, where we have to have this fairness, and we only give if we get something in return from it. And he's trying to push us to this place where we would learn how to give and to be the kind of people that we are meant to be. Jesus never qualified them. Even one time it says that Jesus had been ministering all day to people, and he retreated to a quiet place. He was trying to get a break. And it says, and the crowd followed him. And it says, Jesus had compassion on the multitude, and he healed them all. You see, what happens is when we begin to give to all who ask, and when we begin to give, not expecting anything in return, we just frankly become better people, and we become more Christ-like. So I'm going to tell you a little story that my sister told me this week. It was really extraordinary. And she's a principal of a school, and they had a boy come in kindergarten, and his hair was pretty long, and he grew it all year long. And the next year, he was still growing his hair into grade 1, and he's 6 years old, and he had this long hair, and he wore it in a ponytail a lot of days. And the other boys used to tease him about this and bully him because he had this long hair. And he never explained why he had this long hair, and he never defended himself, and he just rolled with it, and he just let the abuse come. And then one day, he comes to school, he's got all his hair cut off. And so my sister says to him, Eric, you got a haircut. And he says, yeah. She says, so why'd you cut off your hair? He said, are you ready for this? He said, I was growing my hair to donate it for wigs for kids with cancer. Isn't that something? And he never, during this whole time when he was being teased for 2 years, he never defended himself and explained why he was doing it. He accepted and bore the reproach of it because it was more important for him to give and more important for him to do what was right than worry about how people treated him. And I'm thinking, why couldn't we be more like that 6-year-old child, right? There's something extraordinary about that picture. So the first thing is this, is we give because it's a way to love God. The second thing is we give because it makes us better people. And the last and the final thing is this, is that nobody ever became poor by giving. And that's a quote by Anne Frank. And you know, John Wesley, who was the great preacher in the 1740s and in that era, he said this, he said, if I die with more than a few pounds, British pounds in my pocket, I'll have lived and died as a thief in this world. And when he died, the only thing he had to his name was his books and a few coins in his pocket. And he actually was not impoverished. He made an immense amount of money in his life, but what he did with it was he gave it away as he went along. And he gave and he gave and he gave, and the more he gave, the more it came back to him. And his advice to us was this. He said that you need to earn what you can, save what you can, and give what you can. And that's in contrast to our mentality, which is get what you can what you get, and sit on the can. And I want to just close by reading a passage to you. It's in the text we're in. And I just want to close with this thought and tell you this is why you want to be a giver and why you want to live to give. Verse 38 in Luke 6 says this, give and it will be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you. God says this. Jesus himself says this. You cannot outgive God. And if you will live to give, what he will do is he will open up the windows of heaven, pour out a blessing on you. You won't have room to receive it. That's the God we serve. That's the promise we have from him. And that's why we want to live to give.
Church of the Rock has services every Sunday at 1397 Buffalo Place, and we invite you to join us when you're in the Winnipeg area. If you'd like a booklet to help you understand more about God's gift of forgiveness and reconciliation through Jesus Christ, please contact us, and we'd be happy to send you a free copy of the Book of Hope. Visit our website at www.churchoftherock.ca. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.